Black Lives Matter and White Fragility, that book by DiAngelo, and some of the other, all of the books that are being promoted and people are being advised to read them. I can't think of the other titles now. How to be Anti-Racist. All of this new literature is based on an ideology, a belief system, a worldview. So it's called critical race theory, and critical race theory views groups of people based on their race as either oppressors or oppressed. So oppressors or victims or oppressed groups. And they're in a constant struggle for power. So in this critical race theory ideology, racism has a new definition. It's not the one that we're familiar with. It's not the one that's in the Oxford English or Cambridge dictionary. In this definition, all people of one race, white people, are racist. It doesn't matter what they do or what they think, their behaviour or their views, it's just inherent to them as a function of their race, as a function of being white. And that can only really make sense if you characterise Western civilization as a system of white supremacy. People of the other race, black people, on the other hand then, they're defined by their oppressed or victim status. They are incapable of racism. They cannot be racist toward any other race by virtue of their position in this power struggle. So remember that they're the oppressed group. Now, if a white person denies this and says, no, I'm not racist, I've never been racist, then that's merely proof of their racism, according to this ideology. So there's no point denying it. You might as well admit to it and then start doing the things that are outlined in the literature that you must do to be what's called an anti-racist. And the circular reasoning as well for if black people deny the ideology. So, or a black or mixed or whatever person says, I think this is utter rubbish, as I've said a few times, then that's evidence that they're actually complicit and part of the system of white supremacy. So don't deny anything. That's just proof that these things are so. This very circular reasoning. So what comes to a lot of people's minds, I think, during these times, when suddenly it seems that we need to start making judgments about people based on their race, we need to say, oh, well, they must be oppressed because they're black, they've got privilege because they're white. Some people have kind of thought, hang on a second, this doesn't seem like what I grew up with. This doesn't seem, I thought there was something about not bothering to look at what colour someone is. Obviously you see if someone's a different race, but I thought we weren't really supposed to infer and make judgments based on that because I thought that was racist, actually, to do that. That is so. Martin Luther King, his speech, words from his speech are often quoted, where he says that we shouldn't judge people by colour, the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is a really nice quote that exemplifies that whole position of not being racist, not judging by colour, but looking and seeing what kind of person the person is, rather than holding views based on the colour of their skin. Martin Luther King's vision of judging a person not by colour, not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character, believe it or not, this is actually viewed as racist within the critical race theory worldview. How on earth can that be? Well, it's because it doesn't promote the idea that racial identity is all important. Remember, that's what critical race theory is about. It's all about racial identity. It's about creating a white consciousness and a white racial identity, and about having a black identity, and they are opposed in this constant power struggle. So to say, actually, one's skin colour doesn't matter that much, according to the critical race theory ideology, that's actually racist, because you're denying the system of white supremacy, you're denying the power relationships, you're denying that racial identity is all important, therefore you are actually racist. So white privilege, whiteness, blackness, white fragility, Lots of new terms that are pre-modified by the words white or black, anti-racism, microaggression, white supremacy, they're all part of a long list of new concepts and new definitions for old concepts that promote this idea that racial identity is all important. These concepts all form part of this new racial ideological worldview called critical race theory. So, oh gosh, I feel tired just after saying all that. What a bloody nightmare. To think I've lived my whole life and I'm 30 odd years old and the colour of my skin has never defined me before, and now suddenly, according to BBC and lots of companies around this country and even apparently some schools and universities, now suddenly my race is all important. What did we believe before? What was the worldview that we had before? What was the thing that we all held to and believed, and it was just part of us, so much so that we didn't even really think about it or know what it was called? Liberalism. So let's remind ourselves of the liberalist approach to dealing with race and racism. So in liberalism, we are individuals, you and me, and our shared human experience is what defines and unites us. So whatever your background, whatever your skin colour or your sex or whatever, even the experiences that you've been through, we can understand each other. You and I can understand one another on some important level simply because we are human. We've got this shared human experience that defines and unites us. Racism, by definition, is when we attribute characteristics to a person, you or me, based solely on race, based on race. So if I were to say, assume something about you just because of the colour of your skin, that's racist. Anyone can be racist. Doesn't matter what colour skin you've got. You can be racist towards another person or a group of people. And racism is always wrong. Liberalism upholds the universal principle that to discriminate based on race is wrong. We're all human, and that's important in liberalism. Each individual has value and deserves dignity simply by virtue of being human, not by virtue of some aspect of their identity. And so, as Martin Luther King put it, and as we referred to earlier, we should judge by the content of a person's character and not by the colour of their skin. Those are classically liberal ideals. So I certainly had held that view without really thinking about it too much. I suppose you could say I'd taken it for granted. There'd never been an opposition to it. There'd never been a need to look back and reaffirm, what do I believe about this? It had never been challenged. The only time it was challenged was by racists. So if I think about the racist experiences that I've had in my life, not that many thankfully, but when I have had a racist experience, that was when that idea was challenged. For some reason, somebody thought that that wasn't so. Our shared human experience didn't make us equal and the same, and our shared experience didn't unite us or define us. Suddenly my skin colour did. Suddenly skin colour mattered, and we had different colours of skin, and that led to conflict. So for me, the only time that that was ever challenged was when somebody was racist toward me. But now it's being challenged every day through the media, through BBC, for crying out loud. It's unbelievable. Telling me suddenly that I don't have privilege. Other people, even members of my family, because I come from a mixed race family, have privilege over me. I can tell you that it's nonsense. It doesn't bear out. There's no evidence for it. So empirically, in terms of what we can see around us, it doesn't bear out. And historically, it's not a good idea to start seeing the world through a lens of race. It's not a good idea. It leads to division and much worse things. I'm not saying that it will lead to terrible things like oppression and tyranny and genocide as it has done in the past. I'm not saying that that will happen this time, but those should surely be signs that we take from history that this isn't really a good thing to do in humanity. I think for me, the two most important questions are what defines you and me. In critical race theory, it's our race or our skin colour that defines us above everything else. And we attribute characteristics to other people and groups of people based on their racial category. That's what defines us. Racial identity is all important in critical race theory. In liberalism, we're human above all. Our humanity defines us, not our skin colour. And then the other question that I think is really important is what What does it mean to be racist? What is racism? In critical race theory, racism is inherent to white people and to Western civilization. In liberalism, racism is to attribute characteristics to individuals or groups based on their race and to discriminate based on race. So the funny thing is, or it's not funny, but the thing is, this new racial worldview or ideology, critical race theory, is by definition racist. So who cares anyway? Like, the main thing is that we all basically hate racism. We all want people to be equal and for injustices in the world to be got rid of. Why should it matter if there are two conflicting worldviews out there? Liberalism and critical race theory. Like, who cares? Well, I would argue, and there's evidence for this, because you can turn on the news and see what's being reported at the moment and hear the stories people are telling. These two opposing worldviews do affect our daily relationships and interactions with people of other races. They translate directly into them. So, in critical race theory, conversations, interactions, relationships are strongly constrained by the ideology. So I'm going to cite Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility. She says, when an interaction's going on, so when, let's say, me and one of my friends or another person who happens to be white, remember, I'm mixed race. So she says, the question is not, did racism take place? But rather, how did racism manifest in this situation? So for me, my job, and the job of somebody who is determined to be anti-racist, as it's called, our job would be to train ourselves to learn to interpret certain words, actions, behaviours as racist. So we're having a conversation, someone says something, I have to listen carefully and be tuned in to what's being said. I don't have to so much pay attention to the attitude or intention of the speaker, because intention isn't really part of it. It's more, have they said something that I could interpret as racist within this framework? Remember the oppressor power struggle? So to give an example, and it's a real example, it happens to me all the time. People pronounce my surname wrong. So I would interpret that as part of white supremacy. It's racist, because the reason that they have said my name wrong is because they are inherently racist, and they're part of the Western system of white supremacy. It's not because my surname isn't English, and it's a very rare surname as well. People have never tried to pronounce it before. They didn't really think it was important to ask me, how do I pronounce it? They just had a go at saying it and said it wrong. So I'd have to interpret that as racist within this worldview, and that would actually be called a microaggression. It's quite complicated. I feel tired just thinking about it. So that's one example. Another example could be a woman holding a baby during a Zoom meeting if she's white and the baby isn't white. Something like that happened recently. It wasn't a woman, it was a man. But just say that that baby was her niece. Anyway, you'd have to interpret that as racist because, well, gosh, I can't give the justification, but someone did say that that was racist within critical race theory. Think about the power relationships. Think about what's being portrayed. I think we're supposed to assume that people would find that insulting somehow. Apparently, we need to read Robin DiAngelo's book and the other one, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and then we'll understand why that's wrong. Personally, I don't think it is wrong. I'm just giving examples of how critical race theory translates into our conversations and interactions and relationships. So remember, every word, action and behaviour has to be interpreted through the lens of race and through the lens of this assumed power struggle between black and white groups. In liberalism, we interact and converse with others freely and assume the best, unless it becomes apparent, of course, that there's a reason to think otherwise. So these two worldviews are diametrically opposed. It's like they're opposites. One of them is saying to do something and see the world in a certain way that the other regards as racist, and vice versa. So, personally, I don't want to have this worldview pushed on me where I'm supposed to be in a perpetual conflict with my fellow human beings, some of whom are my family members and best friends. I don't want an ideology where I would see someone as a friend or an ally because they have the same colour skin as me, or they have dark skin. It might be darker than mine, mine's quite light. I don't want that. Or for me to see somebody as my friend or my ally because they agree with Robin DiAngelo's book and they're trying their best to follow out what she's saying. That's not how I view the world. I definitely don't want to live in a world where assumptions are made about me, about the things I do, whether I fail or succeed, about my intentions, based on the colour of my skin. When I do something really good, something I'm really proud of, I don't want it to be, oh, she's mixed race and she achieved that. No, thank you. That's not how I've ever viewed my achievements and how others have viewed them, and I don't want it to start now. And the same for if a white person achieves something. Let's say we both achieve something that we're really proud of. So that could be said to be due to their privilege. They only did that because, you know, they've got white privilege. And she did it because she must just be really lucky because she managed to do that even though she's a victim and she's oppressed. No, that is not how I view the world. There's no empirical basis for that. Just talking on a personal level, because things that happen around us, you know, that's data as well. It's made no difference that my skin is darker than my family members and friends. It's made no difference whatsoever. Sometimes I achieve wonderful things and do better than those around me. Sometimes it's the other way around. It's not as a function of our skin colour, and it's not as a function of racism from this white supremacist system. This system is my system as well. But of course, within critical race theory, I'm just complicit, and yeah, I'm deceived and complicit, which is why I can't see that this is a racist system. Oh boy. I suppose my concern is, and the reason why I'm making this video, which is probably just turning into a big long ramble, sorry for that, my concern is that people might be accepting this new ideology without really thinking about it, without thinking critically about it. Remember, critical thinking, asking questions, challenging it. What are the assumptions? What would that lead to? Why should I think that? Is that really borne out by the data? Those kinds of questions. For me, I think one of the most powerful arguments for liberalism and that worldview is history. And one of the things that would most strongly make me concerned and want to be cautious about something like critical race theory is, again, history. What's happened in the past? What kind of people, what kind of leaders have thought it would be useful to adopt a racial worldview? There are regimes in the past that have grouped people and said, this group are oppressors and this group are oppressed and victims. And then there's other things too, like the psychological literature. You know, would that really suggest it's a good idea for individuals to adopt a victim status, a victim identity about themselves? Is that healthy? Is that going to help them as individuals? I don't think so. So history, what's borne out by the data, and what's healthy psychologically, those are three aspects that you might want to consider when you're thinking about whether to move from liberalism to critical race theory. There's a lot more. There's different things you can think about. For me personally, when I hear about liberalism and how that our humanity, our common humanity, is what defines us, and that each individual has value and deserves dignity simply by reason of being a human, not because of some aspect of their identity or some power relationship. For me, when I hear the argument for liberalism, it's like, that's right. That's morally right. And that's the way I want to live my life and the way I want to view the world. And when I see things that are wrong and injustices happening, that's the approach. That's what I would argue as to why something is wrong and needs to change. And another thing that's a very, very, very strong argument for me personally about why I oppose critical race theory and embrace liberalism, it's the thought of children in schools actually being taught to be racist. So they're actually being taught to believe in racist concepts, that certain people have privilege based on their race, certain people are oppressed and victims based on their race. If one person of a particular race does or says this, then it is racist based on their race. I think that's horrible, especially when you consider friendship groups, families, mixed race families. Imagine a kid going to school and suddenly they're told that something very important differentiates them from their brother, for example. That's how it'd be in my case. I come from a very mixed family. I have 2 white siblings, 1 mixed race sibling. And then think of this kid at school. So they've been brought up, like I was, to see, obviously you see skin colour, you see that someone's skin might be lighter or darker, but it doesn't exactly mean anything. It's a bit like, it's not exactly the same, but it's a bit like hair colour or eye colour or some other physical characteristic, right? So that's how lots of kids are brought up. That's how I was brought up, and I have no complaints whatsoever. There were no complications. There was no issues at all with that. It's wonderful. Some people would call it post-racial, and actually, I think that's what is. Someone told me who was arguing for Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. They were telling me that that's actually the goal that they're striving for, and I'm thinking, well, that's funny because that's how I've lived most of my life. So now, by introducing these strong racial categories, you're taking us a step backwards. But anyway, back to my point. Imagine a kid that's been raised in that way that I was raised, and I think many other children and people today were raised. Some people call it colourblind. I don't really think that's a good term because it makes it seem as if you can't see colour. You can see colour, but you're not having racist ideas about colour. That's what it means. So, a kid that's been raised like that, they go to school and are suddenly their teacher, remember, person in authority, person who they trust, their teacher is now telling them that there is something very significantly different about themselves as compared to their friend or their sibling. They're no longer the same. They're no longer defined as the same and united by just by reason of the fact that they're kids and they're friends and they're human. Now suddenly there's this new factor and it's very important, and it's the colour of their skin. You can't change that. You can't, it's not like a badge that you wear of a particular colour and it's like, oh no, actually I fancy being on the green team. Let me get a green badge so I can be with my friend. No, it's an immutable characteristic, your skin colour. And so to have someone say that it actually means something socially now, I think that's frightful. And so children being taught critical race theory, for me, is another very strong argument that this should not be happening. This is wrong, it's regressive, it's more than one step backwards, it's scary. It's a racial ideology, a racial worldview, and we should be rejecting it and questioning it and challenging it, not just unwittingly accepting it. One final thing that I just have a few thoughts on is why? Why is this new worldview something that people seem to be accepting? I think that it might be for a couple of reasons. Emotion, popularity, and wanting to be on the right side of history. So I'll quickly talk through them. No one can deny that videos and accounts of Black people being abused, even killed in America is highly emotive, traumatic, wrong. And so when you see a video or hear an account of something like that has happened, it must trigger such strong emotion and such a strong sense of injustice. This is wrong. I think that kind of mind frame is helpful or even necessary when it comes to a person rejecting a worldview that they have held and accepting a new one. I don't think that that's something that you could just do without quite specific circumstances and emotion. There is work on what causes people to accept different worldviews and how the emotion is a key ingredient. It's used even when trying to change people's views in re-education camps and things like that. So emotion's one thing, and I think popularity is another. It's very trendy to be fighting for some cause, especially when it has a nice logo and there's different books you can buy and things you can watch on YouTube, and companies are saying that they support it and people are doing symbolic gestures and things. It's easy to get caught up in something like that. I think that popular appeal plays a massive role in why somebody would start to accept a different worldview. And then the third thing, what did I say? Emotion, popularity. The third thing is wanting to be on the right side of history. So racism is wrong. And when something comes along and it has a label on it that says anti-racist, that's against racism, that is for fighting for justice, social justice, racial justice, of course you feel inclined to stand for that and support it and take it on and make it your own cause that you're fighting for and standing for and with. So I totally understand why some people might have accepted this new worldview. Everybody wants, well, most people I think want to be on the right side of history. They want to be standing for what's right and good. I would just plead with anyone who really believes that critical race theory is the way forward, the way to a more just world. I would just plead with them to think about the things that I've said. Not that I'm important or anything. I'm not, of course, I know that. But just to think about it and to challenge, question, critique, play devil's advocate with your own beliefs, and consider whether you really believe that the means don't matter if the end, the high and lofty goal at the end, is right. The means and the collateral damage and everything, if that doesn't matter. And just ask yourself whether you think truly that this is right.